What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It has been a hot minute. I am live down here in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl, back as good as ever with the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Marcus Whitman. Again, guys, use that promo code ThatFranchiseGuy if you're shopping for tickets. You're going to get the best prices there. It's the best platform, all that. It's where I buy my tickets. You will save $20 on your first purchase and help support the podcast in the process. Beyond that, just really sharing the podcast, telling your friends, and also leaving reviews on iTunes, Spotify. Also, an amazing way to help support the show. So a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot to catch up on. Actually, not going to be any sort of Super Bowl preview in this show. This is going to be pretty draft intensive, which is going to be the majority of this show. We actually have my first guest of the podcast. It's going to be Andrew Wade from Locked On Hawkeyes. He is in this house with me down here in Mobile. He's part of the Stick to Football Madden League that a lot of you guys follow on my Twitch. So we're going to talk some Big Ten, talk some Iowa football. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then we do have a couple topics to hit on before we talk draft. So let's get into the show here. I got to start with Eli Manning. And I'm going to try to keep this brief because obviously announcing his retirement, it's been a big hot topic on, is Eli Manning a Hall of Famer? And I say I want to keep this short because to me, it isn't even remotely close. Eli Manning is not a Hall of Fame quarterback. He just isn't. He has a career quarterback rating of 84.1. That is 44th in the history of the NFL, and that is playing in a much more pass-heavy era. These are names of quarterbacks who have a better quarterback rating over their course of their career. Sam Bradford, Case Keenum, Jay Cutler, David Garrard, Alex Smith, Andy Dalton, Carson Palmer, Nick Foles, Colin Kaepernick, Marcus Mariota, Ryan Tannehill, Derek Carr, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, and Dak Prescott. That's a long list of guys that for the most part are not Hall of Famers. I don't know if any of those players on that list are Hall of Famers, and Eli has a worse quarterback rating than all of them. And I know a lot of you guys are saying, but Marcus, you always say stats don't matter. And, you know, that's for the most part a good philosophy to have, but stats like quarterback rating, career passing yards, touchdown, interception, like that stuff over the course of a 15-plus year career does paint a picture. And sample size is a big reason why I say stats don't matter. Well, when you're looking at a guy's whole career, it is definitely something worth looking at, especially more so than did this guy happen to play on Super Bowl caliber teams. Eli Manning also 366 touchdowns to 244 interceptions. Not even close to a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which is, I don't even want to say that's the standard now. If you don't have a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, you're probably not starting in the NFL. He only has 3 seasons in his career with 30 passing touchdowns, only one over 31. And you want to point to his Super Bowl championships. Guys, in 2007 when he won a Super Bowl, his opponents scored 14 points, 17 points, 20 points, 14 points. In 2011 when he won a Super Bowl, his opponents scored 2, 20, 17, 17. So in the 4 playoff wins that Eli Manning had to, take his team to the Super Bowl, like he played so great, he was so great in those playoff runs. In 8 games, his opponents never scored over 20 points. So that's the definition of football being a team sport. We've seen Nick Foles win Super Bowls. We saw Blake Bortles almost get there. We just saw Ryan Tannehill get there. That's the category that Eli Manning was in. Yes, he's a Manning and was the face of the New York Giants because of what happened early on in his career. Yeah, he stayed durable. Awesome. Those aren't traits that get you in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Put him in the museum. Put him in the Hall of Fame museum and say, Eli was a very accomplished quarterback in this decade, and put a whole shrine for him in the museum. I don't care. He does not, and I have nothing against Eli Manning personally, so I don't want to say he doesn't deserve a bust in the Hall of Fame, but he has not earned a bust in the Hall of Fame. There was maybe one season, like 2015, where you could make an argument that he was even a top 10 player at his own position. So no, Eli Manning is not a Hall of Famer. He will be. He will be, because people just continue to glorify Super Bowl rings, setting a terrible standard, a terrible precedent for years and years of sports analysis moving forward. And it's ridiculous. He will be a Hall of Famer, but I just want to make it very clear that in no world will Eli Manning be in the TFG Hall of Fame, if you will. And then the other point I want to talk about before we kind of reflect on the Senior Bowl and how everything's going down here for Mobile, for the prospects, myself, I do want to talk about Lamar Jackson just a touch here. I actually haven't had a podcast since he did lose in the playoffs, and I won't get too far into that. I mean, Lamar Jackson should have won MVP this year. He was incredible. You can't tell the story of the 2019 season without Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, but I kept saying week after week after week, he's not a very, top-end passing quarterback. If he gets down from behind, how much do we really trust him? And I caught a lot of flack for this, and it's the only reason I'm bringing this up, is because when people say the things that they said to me about the things I was saying about Lamar Jackson, I do feel like I should get 2 minutes on this platform to talk about Lamar Jackson. And ultimately, he did not have a very good game. Neither did a lot of people around him, but ultimately they did lose earlier than a lot of people were expecting, and a chunk of that was they just weren't a traditional offense. They couldn't, revert off of their typical game script and become more of a passing offense, among other problems as well. But I just want to talk about actually the Pro Bowl for a second, because the one thing I watch for the entire Pro Bowl weekend is the precision passing drill, and that's why I want to see more stuff like that at the Pro Bowl. But that's the one thing I actually watch, because I like to see the quarterbacks there kind of compete as far as, like, what does your accuracy look like? And, in this, Lamar was kind of slouching. He's wearing sweatpants. It's not a game environment. I get all that. But, I still want to see you come out and, try to prove to the other quarterbacks in the league that are supposed to be the best in the league, but it never ends up being that way because of the way the Pro Bowl works. But, just prove that you're one of the better passers in the league. And Lamar Jackson, I tweeted the clip out. If you want to go to my Twitter and see the clip, at TFG_football, if you're not following me. But Lamar Jackson was miserable. It was one of the worst reps of that drill I've ever seen. And he came out swinging big, was trying to hit the deep balls, and a lot of them weren't even close. He was coming up short. And then he started trying to hit those short ones, which, they're moving targets. It doesn't represent real football. I don't really want to discredit Lamar's season in any way or anything like that. But we're talking about a guy that there are people out there that will tell you that Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback in the NFL. And the notion of that is absolutely, utterly, preposterously wrong. He is a top 10-ish quarterback, and in the context of what he does running the ball in that offense that is perfect for him, he's one of the hardest offensive players to stop in this league. But as we saw, and as we talked about with the Ravens earlier, being a quarterback does not just mean you can run. It means you can be versatile. You can adapt to defenses. You can read and react and do things like what Patrick Mahomes is doing, even things that like Jimmy Garoppolo has done throughout the year. It's just much harder to stop a quarterback when he can execute a full-on passing game. And I think Lamar could actually still get there. I have nothing wrong with like his processing and the way he can read coverages. I think he actually is only going to continue to get better at that. But the underlying thing heading into this year was Lamar Jackson's accuracy, and he improved a lot of those things. But over the course of history in the NFL, accuracy over time just doesn't get all that much better. As a rookie, he was one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks PFF has ever charted. He improved that immensely in his sophomore season. But I do think, as we saw in that game against the Titans and in this precision passing drill, and even in little moments throughout the season, that there's still some concern there. So, I'm not trying to totally take a dump on Lamar. For me to sit here based on how I looked at him heading into the year and now saying he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. That is a massive jump. I typically don't make those big jumps in as far as like where I rank guys just within one season. So Lamar has impressed me a lot, but I do think we are heading towards some serious brake pumping on Lamar Jackson next season, when perhaps things won't be going so much the Ravens' way as they kind of did this year. Not to, tick off a bunch of Ravens fans, but he's going to have a hard time repeating what he did next year. And if he does, I'm not saying he can't, if he does, that will certainly wow me away, and I will give him a lot of credit if he does. I just am fully expecting a little bit of a regression from the Ravens as a whole next year. All right, let's move on and talk about the draft, which is what a lot of you guys are excited to hear about. Like I said, I'm down here in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, where all of the prospects who have degrees are allowed to come down and showcase their skills and compete against one another. And this is the first time I've come down here to the Senior Bowl, and it's been really cool. I've heard a lot of stories about the Senior Bowl, about how it's a great place to come down and not just see the prospects and that, but the access that you have to everything down here is really cool. It's a small town. I don't even know the population, but it's a cool little town. I don't even want to say cute. It's a cool town, old school town, and just the game itself. Basically, it's a small stadium. Probably 20,000 people can fit in that stadium, and then there's a gate that goes around the field. And you have to have credentials to get on the field. You got to be like team personnel or whatever. But just outside of that gate, which is literally, 15 feet from the sideline, like of the field, you can walk all the way up to that gate. You can go anywhere in the stadium for the most part outside of the press box and just either be close to the coaches and the players on the field. It's super easy to, meet the players after practices because they go out the same exit you leave the stadium, because it is like a small, like almost, Division II-esque stadium. Like everyone's leaving the same way. And then all around you've got media personnel, you've got NFL scouts just walking around, and it's just a great networking opportunity. And then I brought up the town earlier because if you're 21 and up, you go out to the bars after practices, after the game, and it's just a great opportunity to meet people. So if you are, I get a lot of questions on this show. People want to work in sports. What do you want to do? I can't believe it took me this long to get down here. I will certainly be coming down to the Senior Bowl every year now because this is just an awesome opportunity. Whether you want to be in media or on the football side of things, it's just a great opportunity to meet people. And, just to name drop like how easy this was for me to meet people last night. We went to the Stick to Football live podcast with Matt Miller, Connor Rogers, the Bleacher Report guys, and we were at a small little dive bar. They did their podcast, and then they just came out and were just hanging out with the people at the show. And I was talking to Matt and Connor for a while. Connor actually might come on to either a mock draft or do he's a big Jets fan. Might do the Jets deep dive with me. So, that was cool to meet him. And then over at another bar, it's Dietz, I think. I was hanging out with the EA guys, Andre Weingarten and Dustin there, the ratings guys. All the PFF guys were there, and just hanging out and just talking football, recapping what you saw at the practices, and it's just a great environment. It's fun to come down here, open access. So for those wondering what it's like down here, if you're debating if you want to come down here, I would certainly endorse it, especially coming down here for the practices. And I know some of these media guys and scouts actually leave on Saturday and don't stay for the game because you can see the whole game on TV and they get the all 22s and stuff. But certainly for the practices, really, really cool. But let's talk some actual football here. I'm basically going to go through position by position and talk about who stood out to me for better or worse. I think most of the guys on this list, it's for the better. And I do have a full disclaimer. I was really focusing on, the quarterbacks, to see them in person. How does the ball look coming out of their arm live? And also positions that I can't necessarily evaluate as well on tape, whether it be because of access, because of being smaller school prospects that you can't really find the tape on, or guys that if you're trying to watch a broadcast of the game, they're not going to show up as much. So like corners, wide receivers who sometimes come off the screen when you're watching a broadcast view. So like the positions I didn't pay the most attention to, running back, tight end, D-line, linebacker, are kind of the four positions that for whatever reason I wasn't quite as focused. Safety as well, it was just kind of hard to see guys stand out at the safety position. But I got a lot of guys at quarterback, wide receiver, O-line, and some corners that really stood out to me as well. But anyway, let's talk about the quarterbacks, and I'm going to hit on all of the ones that were there, starting with Jordan Love, who, no pun intended, is the love child kind of the draft. And he's got a very similar allure about him, in my opinion, to what Patrick Mahomes had coming out. Now, Love doesn't have the same arm talent that Patrick Mahomes has. He's not going to come into the NFL and make cross-bodied throws and do all this crazy shit that Patrick Mahomes does. But physically, he does have some comparisons. He just kind of is physically built like him. He's kind of thick, lower body, like 225. He's got fairly similar athleticism. Mahomes isn't some elite athlete. He's very athletic, has that ability to escape the pocket, and Love has all that as well. So, physically, he just kind of has this allure about him of like, you can just kind of picture this guy. If he lands in a good situation where he's got talent around him, he can develop, he's got a system that kind of simplifies things for him, he could really be a star in the NFL, and you could see the arm talent in person. Again, it's not Patrick Mahomes-esque, but it's very, very good. Right now, my pro comp for Jordan Love is actually Sam Darnold. And, that's kind of a sensitive topic because I did have Sam Darnold as the number one quarterback in that draft class, and I called him a generational prospect. I'm not obviously giving Love that same endorsement. I'm more so talking about what we've seen from Sam Darnold in the pros, which is a drop-off of how I hyped Sam Darnold up to be. Just for one, physically he is almost identical as far as his mobility, and his arm talent is very similar to Sam Darnold in that it's, the term good to great, good not great is used pretty often. I would actually say Love and Darnold have great, not elite arm talent. It's a 6 out of 7, if you will. And there's also the mental stuff there with Love. There will be times where he just doesn't process things correctly, or he doesn't put the ball almost because of his mental where it should be. Because I think he is pretty accurate. There were a couple throws that he left behind. I don't think he's got elite accuracy, but I think it's good enough. I don't think accuracy is a big concern with Jordan Love. But he threw a pick yesterday. He had the tight end coming open, kind of split in the second level of defense between the safeties, behind the linebackers. He had the tight end coming open, and if he really uncorked it with a little touch, or with a little lob rather, he would have been able to squeeze it in there. But for some reason, he kind of fired it right at the tight end instead of leading him. And just watching the play, it looked like that was what he was trying to do, was just fire it right at him. And it actually got picked off over the middle by the linebacker who was in position to make that play. So I see Love as a guy who mentally could benefit immensely from sitting for a year, just like, say, Patrick Mahomes. But is the guy in this group that I could really see blowing up. And the team I mocked him to is the Indianapolis Colts. And I can just picture 2 years from now, we're looking back and hyping up Frank Reich and Chris Ballard for drafting Love, putting him in a great position to develop and succeed. Similar ways that we talk about guys like Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, who had excellent teams and cultures there to develop him. And really just applauding everything and Jordan Love's development. Now, I could also picture a world where he goes to a team like the Jets with Sam Darnold, and they aren't able to put that support around him. And there are moments that are more bad than good. So He's not some lock prospect. I don't even have a top 10 grade on him. I do have a first-round grade on him. I think he's a 10 to 20 guy, and that is why I mock him to the Colts. But he certainly, I would say, met expectations for me. I don't think I'm going to say he exceeded expectations. He kind of came in around where I expected. You definitely saw the physical profile you look for. So spending a lot of time there on Jordan Love, I think that's the guy a lot of people really wanted to hear a lot about. And then the other guy is probably Justin Herbert, who I'm infamously low on at this point. I have currently a second or third round grade on him. Let me pull it up. I think it's 2 to 3. It might even be 3 to 4. Let me see. Justin Herbie's 2 to 4 is my grade on Justin Herbert. So Herbert actually kind of impressed. Now, I kind of figured this would happen. He'd come in, have that physical presence, just the towering 6'5", 6'6" guy. He's got the arm talent. It all showed. It was almost like this week was too easy for him. Throwing one-on-one drills with predetermined stuff and limited opportunities to make mistake, not dealing with pass rushes in a lot of these drills. Just the pressure's not very high as far as like processing for Justin Herbert, which really allowed him to lean on just making accurate throws. When I watch Justin Herbert's tape, he's a completely different guy. He's panicky. He can't get off first reads, and he is one of the most sporadic, accurate passers I've seen. Now, this week, the accuracy stuff didn't really show up, so you can see the physical stuff, and there is a world where Justin Herbert becomes a very good quarterback. Ultimately, I do think his accuracy stuff is always going to lurk over. But eyes open a little bit on Herbert. You can see why there is excitement around him. I will definitely admit that. But I did find myself, constantly saying, just keep remembering the film. Because the last 5 to 8 weeks of his season, his last year at Oregon, his last opportunity to impress, his last chance to go on a run, help his team win, and really throw himself into the QB1 conversation as a guy like Joe Burrow was just going off. He just honestly looked worse and worse and worse with his processing and his development and his accuracy. And it feels like this is just another Mitch Trubisky, another Blake Bortles. Trubisky, by the way, a guy that really impressed at the Senior Bowl a couple years ago. And the list goes on and on and on. Jake Locker, guys that have the physical tools, but just didn't really have the development and had all of the flaws of the same profile of quarterback. And Herbert, to me, fits right in there. That's why I have a second or fourth round grade on him, and why my comparison is Paxton Lynch. So maybe that opinion changes based off what I've seen as we continue to move forward. I don't know, but all I will say is that he looked good throwing against air, basically. Then we got Jalen Hurts. I'm not a Jalen Hurts guy. I have him as the 16th quarterback in this class currently. And as I was telling other media guys around the stadium that, as we were talking about him, they were giving me looks like I was mental. And it honestly surprised me that was such a unpopular opinion. I see him as a guy that is a 6th round pick, maybe. Someone like a Shea Patterson who needs to develop immensely, who does have accuracy issues, and a lot of that showed up. But he thrown against air again, did show some good arm strength, did show some decent throws. So, maybe stock up a little bit for Jalen Hurts, especially after seeing how many people do have him as a 3rd or 4th round guy. Maybe I need to take a second look at him. But ultimately, I still think Jalen Hurts is a late round guy that is either probably going to be a running back at the next level or an XFL quarterback. Steven Montez, for those that watched my quarterback video, I was talking about how I need to be careful with him because he has a lot of the signs that Nathan Peterman had that I really liked as a younger scout, kind of just starting this. That was the first draft class I actually did grades on, the first draft class on this channel, and I infamously really liked Nathan Peterman as a guy in that good draft class with Watson and Mahomes, is a guy that I thought had kind of the highest floor of all those guys, and turned out to be the opposite because I was ignoring a lot of the poor decisions and accuracy issues that Nathan Peterman had and focusing too much on the flashy plays, the ability to extend pressure, elude pressure, and throw nice balls on the move, good zip on his ball. Nathan Peterman had and still has all of those things. And Steven Montez, his tape was all of that, and his experience at the Senior Bowl was very similar. He made amazing plays. He looked great throwing against air. You could see the zip on his ball, nice clean release. He moves very well. But also when they went to team drills or 7-on-7s, you could see just those mind-numbingly bad reads, forcing balls that he has no business throwing. So Steven Montez was absolutely himself this week. And then you had Shea Patterson and Anthony Gordon were there. They didn't look like they belonged, to be honest. They were just, tiny people at quarterback. Anthony Gordon, listed at 6'3", he's not 6'3". He's maybe 6'1". He was standing right next to Shea Patterson, who's like 5'11", 6 feet tall. And they were like neck and neck. And he was really slim, like really thin ankles, skinny base. He did not impress. He was just check down Charlie all week. Anytime he threw the ball deep, it's not like there was wind. Anytime he tried to throw more than 20 yards, it was wobbly, inaccurate. I don't know if, Anthony Gordon may have lost himself a lot of money this week. I don't know if he's going to end up getting drafted. The last quarterback I want to talk about is someone that wasn't here. And after seeing Shea Patterson and Anthony Gordon, Patterson again was just nothing about him really catches your attention. And nothing about him is like, that's the guy I want to draft. Shea Patterson is the quarterback we need out of this draft class. Whatever. They're not going to make it. They just don't have the talent. But one guy that does have the talent that I was really upset did not get a Senior Bowl invite was Nate Stanley. And I actually currently have Nate Stanley above Justin Herbert on my draft board. That was another thing that I was saying to people that, they were looking at me like I was crazy. I actually think Stanley, the final 7-8 weeks of his season, was more accurate, better processor than Justin Herbert. And as far as his talent, he is built like an ox. He's 240 pounds, but he can move, and he's got the arm talent. He can really whip it. So he's a guy that I thought got kind of rigged of a Senior Bowl invite. And when we have Andrew on here at the end of the show, I am going to talk to him about Nate Stanley because he writes for Locked On Hawkeyes, so he knows a lot about Mr. Nate Stanley. So the running backs, again, I wasn't watching them very closely. Not only just was I focused on other positions, but it's a position that you can see very clearly on tape when you're evaluating these guys from your desk at home. So I honestly, anytime a running back was involved, I was more focused on the offensive line, the defensive line. I didn't even really look at the running backs because there's only so many things you can look at when you're there in person, especially when you're also busy kind of trying to network and meet scouts and other media personnel. But, when I was watching plays, I wasn't really watching the running backs. And this podcast really isn't going to be me talking about running backs very much. The only note I had on the running backs at all was Eno Benjamin. Not to mention, by the way, the running backs that were at the Senior Bowl weren't the best running backs in this class. Eno Benjamin's up there. But I did have a note on Eno Benjamin, who I do like. He wasn't quite as thick and trunky in his lower body than I expected. I kind of had him as that Kareem Hunt kind of guy that's got that low center of gravity that can break tackles. That's kind of what his film looks like. But he, looked a little more like a Shady McCoy, a little, smaller, quicker. So that's the only note I have on Eno Benjamin. Not sure if he's going to have that low center of body, low center of gravity with that frame. And I haven't really taken a ton of time to dive into running back tape either. So I'm not saying I'm changing my opinion on Eno Benjamin, just that physically he did not look as I expected. Then the wide receivers, this is where I have the most notes, and this is probably where a lot of you guys are going to be curious. And I think the Senior Bowl every year, the wide receivers are where a lot of the hype is because these drills are set up for the wide receivers to shine. Because there's no pass rush to affect the quarterback, so you're getting, for the most part, pretty accurate throws. And also, it's just one-on-one. You're just beating one guy, which is a very tough position for the corners. Not to mention, this is like the best wide receiver class we've ever seen. And that narrative, it's running dry at this point, but it's very true. I don't think I've ever seen a wide receiver class this good. There's like 20 deep of starting caliber wide receivers, whether it's on the outside, a combination of both, or in the slot. But the guys that stood out to me, KJ Hill, of course, like he was all over Twitter. Lots of clips of him, just the quick route running that's going to translate. Stephon Diggs-esque, Devontae Adams-esque, the ability to get open. But his hands really impressed as well. I don't think he had a whole lot of drops, maybe one. But he had a great catch, and I think it was 7-on-7s. And he just had a great catch, like reaching back one-handed. It was actually Jordan Love, threw it behind him, and KJ Hill bailed him out with an awesome catch. So he is absolutely impressing. I thought he was like a fourth-round guy, pretty solid inside-out receiver that can kind of do a little bit of everything but doesn't really stand out in any regard, a decent athlete. But to see that quickness and to see his hands and just kind of his swagger and confidence as a receiver, which I think does matter, really boosted him up. He to me, got himself into the second round. I'm not going to say first round because the first round receivers in this class are so good. It's just going to be, he would need a lot of receivers to go for him to be a first round guy, but he might be close to a first round talent just in this class. I think he's a second to a third round guy. The other guys that impressed here, Antonio Gandy Golden, his tape is just stupid. Like, it's pretty often with these small school guys that end up getting combine invites or Senior Bowl invites. You throw on their tape, like, they're going to kick ass. Like, they're playing against total different levels of competition. So he has that. That's step one for these kind of small school guys to break out. He's from Liberty. And, he had like 1,300 yards. His highlight reels, him just mossing dudes, shaking dudes, outrunning dudes, just everything you look for in a 6'4", 220-pound fast wide receiver at that level. But of course, it's hard to know what his true speed is and how that physicality is going to translate when he's going against real competition. And it translated at the Senior Bowl. Almost immediately, you could tell that he belongs. And my comp for him now is somewhere between Preston Williams and Kenny Golladay. I think he's probably a fourth-round pick in this draft, maybe a third round in years past, which is similar to where I've had a guy like Kenny Golladay. So he impressed, especially with his speed. He's a little faster than I expected. And then Van Jefferson, I love Van Jefferson. And he was underutilized at Florida. Felt like a lot of times watching that game, they just weren't looking his way. But the quick route running, the quick feet, he's got some of the quickest feet in this class, and he's a tall, lengthy guy, 6'2", 200 pounds. And he's got some burst, too. Like, he had a catch and run against, who was it, Virginia this year? They just threw him a bubble on, like, after a holding call on, like, 1st and 20, I think. And he had that acceleration that you don't really see, just catching it, and then with two guys closing, he had the speed and acceleration to screw up their pursuit angles, thinking that he couldn't get started that quickly after catching a bubble in the flat and just taking off and outrunning them. So he's got the speed, he's got the quickness, his hands are solid. Keenan Allen's a great comparison for Van Jefferson, and again, a guy that in other draft classes, if he came out with, Treadwell and Doxson, were they in the same class? If he came out there, he would have been the best wide receiver in that class, but just a little different story here. He's probably, he might not even be a top 10 receiver. This class is so ridiculous. He probably is going to come out top 10 on my board. But he's really nice. Someone's got an absolute steal in him in the second round. Kind of reminds me of like Debo last year or A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, those guys that fell into the first round. Different type of player than them, but value-wise, it kind of reminds me of it. Or Cortland Sutton the year before. Courtney Davis is a guy out of Texas A&M, and his story at Texas A&M is, again, kind of like Van Jefferson, just very underutilized. And anytime a guy like him gets an invite to the Senior Bowl, he's got to catch your attention because, what do you have, like 500 yards, maybe 3 touchdowns, not a huge name like heading into the year. Like he was fine, he was steady, but maybe not even that team's number one wide receiver. And he's a balanced 6 foot, 200-pound receiver, can play a little inside, a little outside, good athlete, good quickness, but never really stood out at his time in Texas, and comes to the Senior Bowl, and honestly a little more of the same. Like, he had some opportunities. He had a couple drops. He had a couple impressive plays as well. He was trying to catch a back corner fade, and he had excellent ability to kind of flip his hips and time his jump in the back corner of the end zone. He just barely got his second foot down. That impressed me. Just a nice balanced wide receiver. The thing about him that I was really hearing from the people around the stadium was the people that interviewed him and had kind of just been watching him interact with the coaches. Like, he was not just dialed in and very coachable, but had that personality you want to see. Just playful. Kind of reminds me of like Jamal Williams, who's known for just being a really likable guy in the locker room. So Courtney Davis, a guy that maybe kind of got himself into the draftable range, because this is such a deep class. I'm not saying he's going to be some even fourth round pick plus, or even a future star in this league, but you do have to round out your rosters with guys that will compete, that are team guys, that'll play special teams. Like, Courtney Davis was just kind of a name that was generating a lot of buzz. So keep an eye on him. And then Denzel Mims, Chase Claypool, kind of the big-bodied freaks that were out here, those two, and Antonio Gandy Golden. I would say ups and downs for these guys. Denzel Mims, both these guys, very physical. Mims has a very nice release package. He's got that nice long bar to kind of keep smaller corners off of him. And he made some really impressive catches. He had some focus plays as well that were not focus plays, that were bad drops or not attacking the football the way he should. Chase Claypool had, again, very impressive physical plays in one-on-one situations. To me, both these guys, you can see how better corners with longer, quicker bodies. To me, these guys are fine. They're probably going to come in that mid-round range of guys that are good contested ball guys that, quite frankly, just might not be able to separate enough at the next level. Very similar to how I felt about J.J. Arcega-Whiteside last year and many guys before. But they definitely made some contested catches that turned your heads a little bit. So, really good group of wide receivers. Tight end, I wasn't quite as dialed in. There was kind of three guys I would say that were noticeable. Bryson Hopkins was a good athlete out of Purdue. Josiah DeGura out of Cincinnati was making plays, really steady hands. And then Steven Sullivan out of LSU, kind of an underutilized tight end, a little similar to Foster Moreau, right? Yeah, he was LSU, correct? Yeah. I'm not going to say I'm going to be as high on him as I was on Foster Moreau or anything like that. And they had Thaddeus Moss there at LSU that was way more utilized. But just kind of that potentially, good athlete, underutilized guy, kind of fits the narrative that's been building ever since George Kittle as a tight end that just wasn't used in his offense, but has the physical skill set to maybe turn into something. He's going to be a guy that we'll see how he tests, but he did look just physically impressive. That was Steven Sullivan out of LSU. And then the offensive line, I paid a lot of attention to the offensive line. I definitely try to get over to that section of the field every time they were practicing. But Matthew Pert out of UConn is quickly becoming one of my favorite players in this class. To see him in person, he just looks like an all-pro tackle. He is 6'7", jacked, low base, long arms, everything you look for. He grades out well. His technique is sound. He made himself a lot of money this week. He was possibly the best offensive lineman there this week as far as who played the best. And then Josh Jones out of Houston as well was generating a lot of buzz. He looked solid. I'm not going to say he stood out to me quite as much, but both those guys were on the same team, the North team, and certainly impressed. This is one of the best tackle classes in a while. There's a lot of underclassmen that weren't at the Senior Bowl that are going to be first, second round guys as well. So really good tackle class. You also have Alex Taylor as a really interesting guy that was creating a lot of buzz. He is a lengthy 6'8", 305-pound tackle out of South Carolina State. I think that's the school. It's the same school that Leonard Darius Leonard came out. And Alex Taylor, really physical, tough guy at his size. Now, there were also reps where you could see that he's going to struggle to get that leverage with how tall he is, especially in the run blocking drills. But there was also times where he packed a punch. He had a rep against, not against Kinlaw, against the other South Carolina guy there that I guess would have been DJ Wonham. But he just, had to reach him. The D lineman was in what would effectively be like a 4-tech, and they were running kind of like a run to the left. So he would have been a right tackle. He would have had a guy on his inside, and he had to reach him, and he was able to do it. So, he's got the quickness. He's got really thin legs, so, he's going to be able to do those move blocks like that. And he's also going to be able to block speed rushers in space. He's the kind of guy that if he had to go up against, say, maybe a Von Miller even, but I was going to say Brian Burns, he would match up really well because he's got the length and the quickness to kind of take advantage of some of those speed rushers' strengths. And because of that length, it's going to be harder as well for guys to get inside and pile drive him like a DeMarcus Lawrence or a Khalil Mack per se. So really intrigued by Alex Taylor, especially seeing his effort in the run blocking drills. So if he has a quick rise in the coming weeks, I wouldn't be totally surprised there. Or he could just be a 6th-round prospect that doesn't work out. He has a long range of potential outcomes there with Alex Taylor. And then Ben Barch. Got to kind of almost give him a shout out at this point, but he went to St. John's, which is a Division III school. They played my alma mater. They're our biggest rival, St. Thomas. Ben Barch, just kind of that tough Minnesota farm boy look and feel. And he showed up. Anytime you go from a D3 to competing in the Senior Bowl against a Javon Kinlaw, who's a top 15 pick in the NFL and a future star, you're going to turn some heads. And I don't know where he's going to end up going. He's going to have to test well, I think, if he wants to be like a day 2 pick or anything. I do think he will be drafted. But he looked pretty good out there. So, I might just be a little hometown bias there with Ben Barch, but I really do think, he was a guy that a lot of people were talking about at the bars the night of and has a chance. We saw who's the guard for the Bucs. His name's escaping me. It's not Brandon Linder. I always want to say it's Brandon Linder, but he's on the Jags. What is his name? I got to know this one. Oh, it's Ollie Marpet. He's from Hobart. So, I think that's D3. But kind of reminds me of that a little bit. Similar size. So that's the offense. Actually, Calvin Throckmorton, one more offensive line name, center out of Oregon. Was just kind of steady all week. Very good base and a good pass blocker, and was doing some nice things as a run blocker as well. So he impressed. And then onto the defense, not quite as many names. We're kind of done with my, close to the end of my notes here. But on the D-line, I really was focusing the most I could on the offensive line because there's not a lot of great opportunities to really see how these guys are coached and how they really react. The D-line, to me, it's a little easier to get takeaways from watching their tapes. Offensive line, it's just a little harder, and honestly, it's more boring to sit there and go through offensive line tape. So I really was focused on the offensive linemen because that's a great opportunity to kind of evaluate those guys. But Javon Kinlaw, you couldn't help but notice him out of South Carolina. Chris Jones is like a great comparison for him. He explodes off the ball. He's just a ball of muscle at 6'5", 315. He plays with the leverage you need to play with at that height. And, sometimes those big-bodied inside guys don't work out because they're so easy to block because they're so tall. That's why D linemen, especially on the inside, keep getting shorter and shorter. But Kinlaw is an exception. He's just raw strength is off the charts. His tape is incredible. He's going to be a top 15 pick. He might fall because of other factors. Like, when I say fall, I mean not be a top 10 pick, but he very well might end up as one of the 10 best raw players, position value aside, in this entire class. And he's one of those rare interior defensive linemen that can make a consistent impact as a pass rusher. Linebacker, Didn't quite pay as much attention to them. For the most part, just wasn't so much paying attention to those drills. The other D lineman I do need to mention is Carter Coughlin out of Minnesota. Again, call me the hometown bias here, but he really does have the bend and explosiveness off the edge. And he just kept making plays for Minnesota. I want to say he had back-to-back years with double-digit sacks. Don't check me on that. It certainly felt like that. And he is kind of, to me, a little bit like a poor man's Harold Landry, who's a poor man's Von Miller. Just that speed and bend off the edge that you just don't find in a lot of prospects. And he's got great instincts against the run, but he is very thin, and definitely saw him getting annihilated in run schemes. So he's a guy that maybe is going to be confined to third down passing situations in the NFL, but he's got a very rare skill set. So that's Carter Coughlin, edge rusher out of Minnesota. But onto the actual off-ball linebackers, only one guy really stood out to me, and I wasn't very close to the linebacker drills. I was more focused on the offensive line, the receivers, the corners. It's just not something I prioritized this week. But one guy that did stand out to me was Logan Wilson out of Wyoming. He's the guy that actually had that pick on Jordan Love that we talked about earlier, and just kind of showed some nice flashes. And he's a guy that's been on my radar for a while. He's someone that if he tested a lot better than people expected, kind of like Leighton Vander Esch did out of Boise, Idaho, a while ago, really increased his draft stock. So Logan Wilson may be a guy that if he drafts well, gets into that second, third round range. And then onto the secondary here, the corners. It's not that I wasn't watching these guys. I was, because I only have two names here to talk about. It was more so just like I said, these drills are built for the receivers to shine. They're putting these corners in very tough situations. But I also just don't think the players here were the top corners in this draft. You know, Christian Fulton was going to be the best guy here, and he backed out. So there's really two guys that I think were notable here. Darnay Holmes out of UCLA. Heading into the year was kind of a top 10 prospect. He's very small. He's like 5'10", maybe even 5'9" after seeing him in person. But he's got that sort of Jair Alexander or who are some of the quickest corners in the NFL. Maybe Gilmore, you could say. He's a little bigger. Darrelle Revis had it back in the day. But just the fluid movement skills that in short areas, they can just, it almost feels like they're teleporting from point A to point B. You know, he had that physically. And he had the scrappiness as well. And I was hearing a story from, this was passed to me from, I don't even know if I should give the name. I don't even know how to handle that. But basically, he dealt with a lot of off-field stuff. He was confined to living with his family in a small apartment on his allowance from school for his housing allowance. And what's cool about Darnay Holmes is he told UCLA when he committed, he was, by the way, the number one corner in his high school class because of that athleticism we were talking about. And he committed to UCLA. He said, I'm going to come to your school. It's a smart school, great school to get a degree from. I'm going to go there for 3 years, and I'm going to graduate, and then I'm going to go to the NFL. And he held up to it. He dealt with off-the-field, family issues, still graduated in 3 years. Now, his tape had his ups and downs in his junior season. He's a true junior coming out, but he was at the Senior Bowl because he did graduate. So he's got the character you look for, and he's got the athleticism you look for. Now, he's a little short. If he's 5'9", a lot of teams don't like that. They want, if you're going to be number one outside corner, you want to have a little more length. He might be confined to the slot, but I think he impressed the most out of any of the corners here, just seeing the way he moves, and he did really compete. He had some good reps going up against Colin Johnson out of Texas, who's 6'6". So that was cool to see and kind of learn about Darnay Holmes. And then Dane Jackson, similarly, none of these corners really consistently showed up. I did see yesterday a corner out of Auburn who must have been a late ad because I didn't even see him on the Senior Bowl roster. So I don't even know his name, and I should have looked this up, but it's hard to know because these guys don't wear their college numbers. So whoever the Auburn corner was on Thursday, he did impress. At some point I will find out who that was. But the other guy, Dane Jackson, out of Pittsburgh, had a really good last year at Pitt. He's a little taller than Darnay Holmes, not by much. But again, you can see the fluid movement skills. He showed nice ball skills at Pitt. And he's a guy that might slip into the second or third or fourth round because he is kind of shorter. But the one guy that he kind of reminds me of is Sean Murphy-Bunting in last year's class, who I really liked because he did have those ball skills. He had the tape and then was just a freak. So both those guys I think could test really well. Maybe not, running high 4.3 40s or anything. If either of them ran in the 4.3s, it wouldn't stun me. But really, like the agility work, like the 3-cone drill, the 40-yard shuttle, the 20-yard shuttle. These two guys, I think, might have two of the best scores in the class at those positions. And then at safety, another position I just didn't see quite as much on. Excuse me. But Kalecki Hudson, thick box safety out of Michigan, just looked really athletic and a guy that was really covering running backs out of the backfield well and could be a good kind of hybrid linebacker box safety type. And that's all my notes from the Senior Bowl, and I'll be at the game on Saturday. So things may change based on what I see at the actual game, but just from practices, those are kind of the guys that stood out the most to me, the guys I felt like I needed to talk about. So we are getting close to the hour mark here. We are going to bring in Andrew here for the interview. We're going to talk some Big Ten. We're going to talk some Iowa football. We're going to talk about Nate Stanley, AJ Epineza, and Tristan Wirfs, some of the top prospects in this class. And then he is going to give me his top 10 Big Ten prospects. And I'm going to give my top 10 favorite non-Big Ten prospects. And then after that, we're going to get on into the mailbag. We got some mailbag questions from my patrons. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, guys, to the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. I am now here with the first ever guest of the Fully Inflated Football Podcast.
I'm the first guest?
First guest ever.
That is exciting. I did not know that.
Andrew Wade. Two major roles here. Locked On Hawkeyes, writing about the Hawkeyes in the Big Ten. But possibly more importantly, member of the Stick to Football Madden League.
Heck yeah, man.
Yep. So we're going to talk some Senior Bowl here. I did want to ask Andrew, we talked a little bit earlier about the Senior Bowl, kind of my experience. I just want to ask Andrew what he thinks about the Senior Bowl and maybe endorse it himself. So what do you think?
Absolutely, man. I think for me, the Senior Bowl is everything I thought it would be. You hear about how open it is to scouts, open it is to analysts, to the media, to the players, and that couldn't be more true. The fact that you can go to the hotel and you can literally walk through and meet anyone you would possibly want to meet, make that connection with anyone you want to make that connection with. I think it's a really cool opportunity for anyone who wants to get into the football media world or just loves the game. At the practices, you can get pretty close access. I think we were sitting on the 50-yard line at the 10th row, which is, and we could have literally sat anywhere.
Literally anywhere.
And you can walk around. You can see all sorts of general managers, coaches. Yesterday I was standing watching the practice. Granted, it was with the media group, but Dan Marino was standing 5 yards behind me.
Yeah.
That is a really cool opportunity that I think I wouldn't have gotten had I not been at the Senior Bowl. And having been at other sporting events, you don't really get that kind of feel other than here at the Senior Bowl. And just Mobile has been fantastic to us, and I've been really happy to be here.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what I was talking about earlier, just how open it is. Like, I totally botched, getting credentialed, which I could have done. They will let...
I thought you were going to.
I know. If you just, you could probably, honestly, at this point, make up a website and just say, I write for this website, and it could have 2 views, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, sure, here's your credentials. But honestly, it doesn't make that big of a difference. You were allowed to go to yesterday's practice because you had those credentials, which I would have definitely appreciated if I had done that. But Other than that, it was pretty much the same, right? The credentials didn't do... I mean, it's nice to have that on your neck and be like, oh, I'm,
makes you feel good.
It makes you feel good. But other than that, your access really is the same for anyone. It's whether you're a scout of a team or just a fan there. So yeah, it's really cool.
The only difference I would say is that if you want to interview players for whatever reason, you have the opportunity to do that with the media credentials. But that is basically the only addition that I had versus anyone else. Or if it gets rained out like yesterday, I was able to go to the practice. But that being said, you all had better views looking on the TV because I was stuck in one corner of the end zone and I was only stuck on one side of it. Fortunately, it was the side I had to be on because I was covering Michael Ojemudia.
Yeah.
But I couldn't see a lot of what else was going on. So in actuality, you probably had a better view yesterday too.
If only the ESPN interns that were running the show would have actually. It was bad, man. They were like not even following the ball. Like the quarterback would release it, and I'd be like, "Okay, who are they throwing to? Did he catch it?" And they would just like still be staring at the quarterback, like staring at his feet after the play. It's like, what are we looking at here? So, but yeah,
that's frustrating
for the most part. Yeah, heavily endorsed the Senior Bowl. So we're going to talk a little bit about the players themselves that we saw, and Andrew, focuses on everything, but also on the Iowa Hawkeyes, and there's some pretty big name Hawkeyes in this class, a couple first-round guys, as well as a quarterback that happens to be a personal favorite of mine that I'm a little higher on. So let's start there with Nate Stanley, who I was talking to a lot of guys at the game and then also at the bars last night, and I was just asking, Mike Renner of PFF and Andre with EA, I was like, hey, you guys think Nate Stanley's any good? And they were like, who? Renner at first was like, oh, Nate Stanley from Iowa, and I'm like, yeah, why is no one talking about him? Why is he not at the Senior Bowl? You asked that to Matt Miller and those guys in the podcast the other day. It's like, I don't get it. He has the arm strength. He has decent pocket ability, like when you're talking about a mid-round prospect, and accuracy is right there with a guy like Herbert, maybe even like Jordan Love. Like, all those guys have some accuracy issues. Like, he, to me, seems like a very legitimate senior prospect that should have been at this game. So where do you stand on Nate Stanley? And you can elaborate on that a little more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm surprised that he wasn't down here. I mean, when we decided to come down here last February, I came down here with the thought that if there was any Iowa Hawkeye who was guaranteed to be at the Senior Bowl, it was going to be Nate Stanley. That was the one guy I expected to be here. Obviously, he isn't, so that was a little bit disappointing. Obviously, got to see Michael Ojemudia, which is fantastic, but Nate Stanley, to me, is at least, I would say, probably a day 3 prospect. At Iowa, he's asked to do a lot. He's asked to basically make calls to the line. He's asked to basically run a pro-style offense, which is something you don't typically see with a college quarterback. For me, that can't be overvalued enough. Having that lack of a learning curve coming into the NFL system, he is a true film kind of guy. I believe I read something where he has never been downtown in Iowa City. To be an Iowa Hawkeye and not go downtown Iowa City, where you would just be king, especially the starting quarterback for 3 years. To me, that just speaks volumes about his character and his work ethic. So no matter what, any team that gets him, this is the kind of guy who I think could be a career backup and a spot starter who can make a difference in 2 to 3 games. He's shown the potential at Iowa where he's had the 6 touchdown games. He's shown some plays that kind of remind you of a very much a Big Ben type of player. He's also had some games where you wonder, how is this guy playing Big Ten football? The fortunate thing about this is it happened in 2017, 2018. He really kind of improved a lot in 2019 where he didn't have any of those huge stinkers of a game. He might not have had the production, but he made plays when it needed to happen. Nebraska was a great example. Didn't do a lot in the early part of the game. They needed a drive, though, and he made those big throws. He has a huge arm. Accuracy is a concern. He actually does have pretty good pocket awareness, and he actually has some underrated mobility.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot to love about Nate Stanley, and I think any NFL team that gets him is going to be very happy, at least as a backup quarterback, as a potential groomer type starter.
Well, and people are going to hear that and be like, oh, why are they spending so much time talking about a potential backup? It's like, well, you guys got to realize, we sat here at the Senior Bowl, we watched Shea Patterson, we watched Anthony Gordon, we watched Jalen Hurts. I don't think they're going to be in the NFL in 2 or 3 years. Like, those guys are not NFL caliber prospects. Like, Nate Stanley, like you said, like, he could end up being a part-time starter in the NFL at a time. Like, my comparison for him right now is actually Jacoby Brissett. A lot of that is the physical comparison. A lot of development and opportunity would have to come, obviously learning in New England and then getting a great opportunity in Indianapolis with Andrew Luck retiring was a dream scenario for any quarterback, but that could be Nate Stanley. So I'm glad we were able to give him a little bit of love, because just talking to the people around here, like,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
There's no hype train on him.
There's just nothing on him at all. So let's talk about the other guys that probably will be first-round draft picks here. So A.J. Epineza and Tristan Wirfs. And I have not quite and I never know if I need to say dove or divin into the tape. I think every single podcast I have struggled with that word, and nobody has ever corrected me on it, so I just kind of mix it up. So I have never divin into the tape on, deep into Epineza and Wirfs. So how about you give a little summary on those guys and what fans can expect if their team drafts those guys?
Yeah, man. First of all, it's funny that I do that same thing where I have a word that I always mess up, and then I don't think about it until I'm trying to say the word again.
Yeah.
So I totally get it. But AJ Epineza, to me, the big thing for him is that he is a 5-star talent with a 2-star work ethic, and I think that's the biggest thing. He came into Iowa as a humble and hungry prospect, a top 30 prospect in the entire nation. He had offers from anyone who would, look at him because he already had the NFL size. He came in 6'5", 250 pounds. He was ready to eat up people already. As a freshman, he got playing time. As a sophomore, because Iowa is such a traditional program, they don't typically play underclassmen if there is an upperclassman who has potential. And I think it made sense for Epineza. He struggled in understanding when to attack the run versus actually go full force at the passer. This season, though, I thought he played outstanding. The stats weren't there for the middle part of the season, but he was getting double teamed or chipped or triple teamed. People like to compare him to Chase Young because they're in the Big Ten. They like to say, who's better, or at least that was the early part of the season until Chase Young went off. I watched a couple games of Chase Young, and this is not a knock on Chase Young. Chase Young against Wisconsin, they were blocking him with the tight end a couple times. I mean, yes, Chase Young is a fantastic player. You're going to find that out in a little bit. He's my number one player. But AJ Epineza was getting double-teamed and triple-teamed constantly because there weren't other guys to take that pressure off of him, and he still had a fantastic season. I think the thing I love about him is the versatility. He could play a 4-3 defensive end. He's a little bit bigger. He could also play a 3-4 defensive end, or if he plays that 4-3 defensive end, he could slide inside on pass rush situations.
Well, and everything you just said, I kind of thought of it before, but just the way you talk about him, I loved Rashawn Gary coming out last year, and he was a guy that didn't have the production, and he was getting just absolutely demolished for that. And then you dial on the tape, it's like, all right, you want to question his motor? Like, that's bullshit. Like, he will blow up a double team and fight the run harder than anyone. Yeah, the pass rush production, he was getting chipped, he was getting doubled, the sacks weren't there, the pressures were, which is why I didn't understand the production questions.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got a lot of that about Gary, and he's that tweener type, like you just said. So, different types of athletes. Gary was a little, straight line speed, and Epineza probably a little stronger, but kind of similar concept there. What about Wirfs?
I love Wirfs. Came from a small town in Iowa, a guy who started as a true freshman.
Offensive tackle, by the way, for those that don't know.
Absolutely, yeah.
So all linemen.
Right tackle, one of the things you're going to hear about him is that, at least from my perspective, he's very versatile. There's some draft analysts that are kind of looking at him as a guard because they don't believe he has the lower base to be able to be a tackle in the NFL. Also doesn't have the arm span. I don't know. I watched him play at Iowa, and he could shut down whatever defensive end he faced. I believe he allowed 1 sack maybe this season, the entire year. He also had to slide over to left tackle to play for Lamar Jackson, who was injured, who was another guy who might be a first-round prospect next year for Iowa. The fact that he had to go from right tackle to left tackle, and he was switching in between series, I don't think people realize that is not very easy to do. You are literally doing completely opposite motions. It would be like writing right-handed and then writing left-handed.
Yeah.
And trying to do it the exact same way, and he did it very successfully.
Not to mention the chemistry with the guards that you got to communicate with, both run game and pass game. So
absolutely, there's so much more that goes into the tackle position than people realize.
Yeah.
That being said, if he does go into the NFL and needs to play guard for a couple of years, you're going to get a guy who's tenacious and athletic and incredibly strong. He set multiple records at Iowa in the weight room.
Do you think Brandon Sheriff might be a decent comparison for him?
Actually, yeah. I think because Brandon Sheriff played tackle at Iowa, I didn't even think about that. And he's been a fantastic guard when healthy for Washington.
And I think he probably could also play tackle if he was asked to do so. But
if
he's just so good at guard that they've just kept him there. Yeah. Cool. All right, so last segment here. We're going to go through. We were originally going to each do our top 10 Big Ten prospects, but I decided he should do the Big Ten. He's the one that pays closer attention to it, and I will do the non-Big Ten prospects. So our top 10 favorite prospects, and that, I don't know, did you do it by ranking how good you think they are, or preference of?
Yeah, I definitely did it by how good I think they are, but I can kind of go on the fly because there are a few guys I really want to call out that'll actually make this a bit easier, because I took notes on about 25 to 30 Big Ten players I really like. So
well, you can just kind of spitball 10 guys that you just really like in general, because my list is, they are great players, obviously, but these are guys that I think, might be sleepers, or guys that I'm personally rooting for, that I will kind of be sticking my neck out for. So you can go ahead and start.
Definitely. So, obviously, let's get the easy ones out of the way. Epineza and Tristan Wirfs. Let's call them what they is. I love them. I think they're great players. I do love Chase Young. He is a fantastic defensive end. I think whatever team, probably the Giants or the Redskins, I think have the number 2 pick. They're going to get a dynamic playmaker at that defensive end position, a guy who disrupts every part of the game. I think he needs to improve a little bit on the rush defense, but he likes to get a little overzealous in the passing attack. But I love Chase Young. Jeff Okudah, I have a big soft spot for man corners. Mm-hmm. I love the cornerback position. I love guys who you can put on an island and you don't have to worry about them at all.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's the Madden in me that I wish I could just shut down every wide receiver with one guy. But those are probably my first 4 guys. Do you want me to kind of go through the rest of them or let you go through yours?
Well, you did 4. I'll do 4, and then we'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, sorry. I was just
it's all good.
Got excited.
So the first guy on my list that I had to do was Jake Fromm because I feel like I am just going to war with Jake Fromm. It feels like what I did with Rashawn Gary last year, where it's like I don't entirely know why everyone hates him. It's like when you really look at it, like Fromm was the number 1 quarterback. He had the Netflix series. Like he was supposed to be a golden boy, and he just wasn't at Georgia. But he didn't suck. Like they won a lot of games. He played a national championship. All his receivers left. Half his he had nothing to work with his final year, and he was fine. He wasn't perfect, but he played pretty good. But yeah, people seem to want to hate him. So I stick my neck out for Jake Fromm. I
love him.
I've talked a lot about him, on this show and on my YouTube channel, so a lot of people kind of know why. But I'll throw his name out there, and then Van Jefferson out of Florida. Every year there's that wide receiver that just didn't maybe have the production. Last year it was. What's his name out of Ohio State? Scary Terry.
Oh, he had a great Senior Bowl last year.
He did. He absolutely did. But Van Jefferson, you dial up his tape, the foot quickness reminds you a lot of like Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams for that bigger-bodied wide receiver. He's not the best contested catch guy or anything, but he'll catch it if he's open, which he does get open. So I like Van Jefferson a lot. We talked about him a little bit earlier when I was going down that, who impressed me from practices. And then I got CeeDee Lamb. Don't even really need to explain that one. The dude's just a effing playmaker. He just is so fun to watch. So I'll be cheering for him. I hope he gets a good quarterback in the draft and can be an impact right away. And then Kayvon Chesson. Smaller dude. Going to be a guy that needs the right fit, probably as a 3-4 team. Probably going to be, as a rookie, more of a situational pass rusher. So that could push him down the draft a little bit. But he reminds me a little bit of Harold Landry. Who fell to the second round of the Titans, went to a 3-4 team, and they've turned him into a hell of a player. So kind of that speed and bend off the edge. So we'll pass it back to you. Yeah,
again, my apologies. I got really overzealous about talking about these guys. I don't get to talk about the whole Big Ten a ton, so it's kind of a fun topic for me.
Yeah.
The first guy I want to highlight, my 5th guy, is KJ Hamler out of Penn State.
Yeah, I want to hear you talk about him because I have not diving into his tape yet.
He fits perfectly with what the NFL is trying to do. You want a fast, quick guy that you can get the ball to in space. That is your guy. And I think the best part about him is because of how deep this wide receiver class is, you can get him in the second round.
That's crazy.
And he's going to have the speed. I think he's going to test really well. I think run a sub 4.40. The quickness is going to be off the charts. I loved what they did with him at Penn State. Against Iowa, he just torched them. He took apart their zone. I mean, basically, the way Iowa plays defense, it's all a cover 3, a lot of zone, right? And KJ Hamler did a really good job of sitting down in space and finding an opportunity to get open. And I think that was pretty awesome to see him be able to, read the field and know where to go.
Yeah, you love to see that. It's kind of like almost like a Brandon Cooks as that deeper guy who, you can be fast. That's one thing. Like Marquise Goodwin can outrun anyone in the NFL, but you also got to know spaces, because you can't just run away from everyone in the NFL. So you got to know, especially against those zones, where to sit. So that's good to hear that he's a smart player, not just a good athlete.
Yeah, and like I said, the speed and the quickness will be off the charts. A little bit smaller of a guy, but I'm really excited to see him go.
Yeah. All right, we'll go 1-on-1 this time.
Yeah. This makes way more sense.
I got another LSU linebacker, and that's going to stir some things up. Chason is a outside linebacker and a 3-4, an edge rusher. Patrick Queen, more of that off-ball cover linebacker. So I was lucky enough to get assigned to LSU for PFF this year. So I did every defensive game for LSU this year. So I got to watch a lot of these early declarators.
What a great year to watch LSU.
Yes, seriously. Although the downside is, I didn't get to see Joe Burrow until the end of the year because I was always working while he was on offense because I just do the defensive side of the ball.
Okay.
But also, LSU's offense scored so damn quick that I was constantly working because I'd be like, all right, time to go get a glass of water. Like, they're on offense. I'm caught up. got all, I'm up to date on my defensive plays, and then I come back and be like, 3-yard drive or 3-play drive, Joe Burrow hits Jamar Chase, 84-yard touchdown. I'm like, all right, here we go again. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time with these guys, and right away, so Patrick Queen actually really wasn't much of a starter to start the year. He's a true junior, just your classic LSU like freak athlete linebacker. Every year they have these guys, but they had a couple linebackers that were slated to start over them, but they had injuries early on in the year, and he really started to take that starting role. And then when they got healthy, they were like, we can't take this guy off the field. Like, he just flies to the ball, great coverage instincts. Maybe not the biggest thumper or whatever in run defense, but he is the definition of a modern linebacker, and a guy that really no one knew about him and came out and had this early declaration. Like I said, he wasn't even a starter heading into the year. So he's a guy that I think is just going to blow people away. He's probably going to run like the 4.4s, like, just because that's just the modern linebacker. And yeah, I think he's going to be a stud.
Yeah, especially in a down year with linebackers as well. There's not a lot of high-level players in this linebacker class. So.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, people love Isaiah Simmons, rightfully so. When you take Isaiah Simmons, you don't know, like, you're going to put him at middle linebacker where he only played 105 snaps at actual middle linebacker. Patrick Queen played every snap as a traditional middle linebacker. Queen might be just as fast as Isaiah Simmons, and he's shown that he can play in between the tackles. Simmons might be more of a strong safety. So
I like Simmons as a strong safety, kind of a Stuart Cravens type, or even like I don't want to make like, but a Sean Taylor type, like the same size, like the speed, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Cam Chancellor, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so my next guy is Antoine Winfield Jr. I don't like Minnesota, but
if he wasn't on your list, I was going to just hit that end button and say, all right, thanks for our guest.
Yeah, I love Antoine Winfield Jr. For me, I just love playmakers. I think I would like to see him about an inch taller, maybe 10 to 20 pounds heavier, but he reminds me a lot of Iowa defensive backs. And maybe that's part of it, but he's always around the ball. When I was watching the Minnesota-Penn State game, he was all over the field. He's a huge reason why they were able to have that, what was considered an upset at the time. At this point, it's just a really good game that Minnesota won because we saw how talented Minnesota actually was this year. But I thought Antoine Winfield Jr. was a great player. As a safety, he's probably going to get dropped down a few rounds. I mean, I see him probably going in the third or the fourth just because safeties aren't valued super high.
Yeah.
But he has the pedigree. His dad's a former NFL player. I loved watching his dad play corner. He has the ability to play a lot of different positions in a safety role. He doesn't have to just be a single high safety. He can come down and play slot corner if he needs to. So I also love that versatility about him.
I'll chime like real quick on him. Like, there's a lot of moments where he reminds me of Eric Berry because of that versatility. And he'll hit you. He'll come down the box. Clutch play, like, not just like he'll make a pick when you're up 2 scores in the fourth quarter. Like, we're talking like games on the line, like red zone. I'm gonna make a freaking one-handed pick to end this game. Like, he has that killer instinct. To me, it's just injuries with him. Like, he could have come back next year as a junior in his 5th year because he's had, I think, he redshirted as a freshman and then also had the medical redshirt. So he is gonna be 22, 23. But he had 2 more years of eligibility left, so like it was a lot of questions on if he was going to come out. But yeah, it's injury concerns with him. I think he's missed 2 of his 4 seasons, like cut short. So that's a big question with him. But I love Antoine Winfield. I got Kenneth Murray next. It was pretty easy. Just everyone loves Kenneth Murray. He's a Bobby Wagner clone, physically just freak, big linebacker. I'll just pass it back to you.
Yeah, so Kenny Wilkes is a guy who I really like. I actually got to meet him at the Senior Bowl, and in talking to him, you could just tell how happy he was to be there, how excited he was, how humble he was as well. And listening to him talk on the Stick to Football podcast, he talked about wanting to be in the dirt. When I talked to him at the Senior Bowl, they were playing him as a 4-3 outside linebacker, and he basically said, 3-4 outside linebacker. Yeah. And I was like, He's like, I'll do whatever I need to do to get on the field. And to me, just looking at his backstory, I'm a former walk-on, wasn't even invited to the Senior Bowl initially, had to get a late invite. I think he's a guy who could be a terror in the league and a guy you can get at the end of day 2, early part of day 3 potentially, just because he's going to get pushed down a little bit. We're not sure where he actually plays. He's kind of in that weird weight spot of, are you big enough to play the end position or are you small enough to play like that edge position? So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of fits, but I love talking to him and he seemed really just excited and happy to be in the position he was.
Football seems like a business for him. And he's ready. Next on my list is Darnay Holmes. I talked corner out of UCLA. I talked about him earlier on in this podcast, but I just love, you talk to the guys around the league, they really look into his backstory. number one corner prospect coming out of high school. Just elite quickness, can just stick on anybody. But, his play dropped off after being a pretty hyped up prospect. But he had his family move in with him in a small apartment that was being provided to him by the university on his allowance.
That's amazing.
Pair that with the fact that when he committed to UCLA, a tough school, told them, I am going to pack my degree into 3 years. I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to go pro. And he did it. Pair that with the fact that his whole family had to move in with him in a tiny apartment. So this dude's got the work ethic. I don't really care that his tape wasn't that good because I see the athleticism and I know the work ethic, and he's a guy you can get probably, late second, early third round. And he's a little smaller, that'll push him back too. But I believe in this guy, so I'll be cheering for him for sure.
Yeah, I don't think people realize just how important that work ethic still is. If you have a person who doesn't just want to get to the NFL, but wants to succeed in the NFL, that's a huge thing. Mm-hmm. The next guy I have is Quintez Cephas out of Wisconsin.
I love him.
He's a freaking playmaker, and it sucks that he had to play with Jack Cohn. It sucks that he played with Alex Hornibrook because, honestly, if he wasn't there, I'd be worried about that Wisconsin offense because their playbook was run with Jonathan Taylor, run with Jonathan Taylor, run with Jonathan Taylor, chuck the ball up to Cephas and hope he catches it because I can't throw it very accurately. And we saw that against Oregon. That was literally their only play they could do outside of jet sweeps was chuck it to Cephas. And the fact that he came down with a lot of them, despite corners knowing that's what's going to happen, that was impressive. So I'm excited to see him at the next level. I think he could be a pretty big play threat. It'll be interesting to see how fast he runs and how much what his agility is because I didn't see a lot of separation. A lot of the times the corner was right on him every single time. He was able to make that contested catch. I haven't seen really much of a route tree because literally it was go deep.
He reminds me a lot of like a college version of Marvin Jones as that number 2 guy that doesn't really wow you with a lot of ways, but like he just somehow like makes that big play downfield and like
ends up with 70 catches and 1,000 yards.
Yeah. So yeah, I like Cephas a lot. Next up, I put this guy down, but that is a typo. Next up, I'm going to have Josh Jones out of Houston, and I'll also just say my next guy as Matt Pert, UConn tackle. I just like sleeper tackle prospects that in a league where you can't find tackles that, it's a deep tackle class, and I'm kind of excited about some good offensive linemen coming to the league because it's going to help these offenses, thrive a little more. So
the last couple of years have been really big down years for tackles, and the fact that we have multiple top 15 tackle prospects throughout the draft, and tackle prospects coming into next year as well, which is really exciting for the league.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I have 2 other guys. The first one's Zach Bond out of Wisconsin. Against Iowa, he just destroyed Iowa's offensive line as a 3-4 edge type of player. I know it'll be interesting to see where he fits at. He's 6'3", 240 pounds, but I just love those guys who are going to work their butt off and do whatever they can to make something happen. He doesn't have the best athleticism, but again, he's a Wisconsin guy. You know what you're going to get with Wisconsin guys. You're going to get hardworking players, not a TJ Watt mold, just a guy who's going to be working really hard.
Yeah.
So, and I like seeing that. And he's been kind of the beauty of the Senior Bowl, man. You can't even get a hold of him. He's literally working with the media every single day.
Cool. So is that all 10 for you? Or you got...
Oh, I have one more. Yeah. No, sorry.
Okay. You go ahead. And
the last
I'll
guy.
Finish up.
Yeah. So the last guy I have is going to be Donovan Peoples-Jones. I want to highlight him mostly because I feel like we just missed out on a possible great career in college because he was stuck with Shea Patterson.
Yeah.
That is my big thing. I'll be interested to see how he runs. Again, a lot of the games I watch are going to be against Iowa and the game before and the game after because I'm trying to do that analysis. But he didn't have a great game against the Hawks. My biggest thing with him, though, is that he can catch the ball. He just didn't get the opportunities.
Yeah.
He was able to win deep. He was able to also, make contested catches. The biggest thing is how fast can he run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a guy that was like a top.
He was a 5-star prospect.
Yeah, like wide receiver 2 or 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
That is a great list and a good in-depth look at the Big Ten. Some names people aren't going to be aware of. I'll wrap this up. My number 10 guy here is Julian Blackmon, kind of an unknown safety out of Utah. And, he killed it at Utah. He was a big reason that defense was so good this year, one of the top-graded safeties in the entire nation by PFF. And another reason I like this guy is you look at the track record of those Utah safeties, and specifically the guys that come out in like the second, third round, maybe not the like elite athleticism or whatever, but just that rangy instincts, but also that physical mentality that Utah preaches there that, they can make those tough tackles. So, you had Marcus Williams, and then you also had Marquise Blair come out second round of the Seahawks last year. And then Julian Blackmon's going to come in, and whoever needs a free safety, you might not get the best free safety in the league, but you're going to get just like steady performance, a starter in the second, third round. The only thing is he did tear his ACL at the end of the year, so got to get healthy. But he's a guy that I think you're just going to get a rock in a pretty good free safety class, to be honest. So
I love it.
That was a hell of a list, man. I am so happy I had you on here. We've got to go do some beer Olympics here pretty soon. So
not looking forward to it right now.
Thanks, Andrew, for coming on. The first ever guest of the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. It was a lot of fun. Where can people find your stuff?
Absolutely, man. So you can find me on Twitter at Wade_Andrew. But honestly, if you follow my my Hawkeyes podcast on Twitter, you can follow that at Locked On Iowa. So that's where you're going to be getting all the content I post for anything Iowa Hawkeyes, and then obviously some Big Ten stuff.
Hell yeah. All right, we'll be back with some mailbag in just a second, and we'll take a little break. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up the show with the mailbag. All these questions are from my patrons. So I'll normally do mailbags. I'll open them up on the Instagram. That's Whitman_Marcus. Sometimes on Twitter, but I do put priority on my patrons. Just $1 a month, and you can ask any question you want and effectively guarantee that it will get answered on the podcast. So because we had a lot to talk about in the show, we are just going to hit on these Patreon mailbag questions. So I want to thank my patrons. You guys are awesome. A lot of people signing up for draft season, just increasing my hype for everything going on here with the NFL draft. So that's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy if you want to get in on the full TFG draft insider package. This one's from Connor Lee. Connor Lee. I said it all rolling off the tongue. It sounds like one name. But here's the question. If you were doing them, you're asking if I'm doing the podcast. Yes, I am doing the podcast. If the Bengals if Joe Burrow didn't exist, who would you draft if you couldn't trade the pick? That's Chase Young. I think that's kind of the consensus and should be the right answer. I know that they have talent at edge. I know that Carlos Dunlap just had an excellent season. He just earned a contract extension. You got Hubbard there. You got Carl Lawson. You've got a lot of talent there on the edge, so I understand the thought process there, but as I sit here right now, I really only see two blue chip prospects, and I just think Chase Young would be revolutionary for that defense, and the other three guys, you could work it out. I don't think Hubbard is a high-end starter. He's a really high-end number 3 guy, a low-end number 2 guy. Dunlap's going to be gone, and I'm really worried about Carl Lawson's kind of long-term health with those knees. He's a great player, and kind of ideally you would have Chase Young and then some combination of Hubbard and Lawson. Like, you're set up for a lot of success. So I do think that'd still be the best pick. I get it, though. Like, if you want to think about Andrew Thomas or Tristan Wirfs, but Jedrick Wills, that could be a pick as well to kind of secure that offensive line. In that world, you would want to trade the pick, but if I couldn't trade the pick, it would be Chase Young because he might be the only legitimate blue chip prospect in this class. I don't even know if Joe Burrow will end up having a blue chip grade. It might just be Chase Young. All right, this one's from Demetrius Johnson. It sounds more and more every day that a team will take Justin Herbert in the top 10. My question is, how big of a mistake would it be, and how far would it set an organization back? Well, if I'm right about Justin Herbert, which is no guarantee, I could be wrong. He could just be a good player. But let's say Justin Herbert is what I think he is, and he's Paxton Lynch. He's a second or fourth round prospect that should not be starting right away. And let's say, I don't even know who in the top 10 necessarily would take him. Let's say the Dolphins decide to take him. I think if the Dolphins took him, it would blow up everything they've been building by trading away guys. I really think it's going to be a very similar outcome. The Chargers are another example behind that offensive line. Could destroy their window with that talent. It's going to be very similar to me, based on my evaluations of Herbert, of what Blake Bortles did to a very talented Jags team, and of what Mitch Trubisky did to a very talented Bears team. Look at how much it set the Jags back. Like, they were in an AFC championship. Now, granted, they were too stubborn to move on. If you can be reactionary like the Cardinals and upgrade your quarterback situation, you can move on from it pretty quickly. But a lot of organizations just mentally bury themselves in these holes, which it honestly looks like the Bears might be making this same mistake. We'll see how their offseason plays out. But, you're allowed to swing and miss at quarterback. That's fine. But, it doesn't take over 2 years to find out if a guy's going to be good. If he clearly isn't getting better, has a ton of flaws, like a Blake Bortles, like a Mitch Trubisky, just move on. Just move on. So it does depend on the team and how they react to it. And again, I don't like Herbert. That's my opinion. He might be good. We just never know on these quarterbacks. But yeah, I don't think it's going to work out. And I think it's going to be similar to those other teams we mentioned. And then you got another question here from Demetrius. There's rumors that 2K is in talks with the XFL to produce a football game. My question is, how much pressure would it put on EA to produce a better game if 2K XFL game is significantly better with a more in-depth franchise mode? It would put a lot of pressure because all of a sudden you would get the NFL saying, okay, well, there's another game company here with the capability to make another game that will pay us for rights, and it will appease NFL fans. It would put a lot of pressure on EA. Maybe not immediately. It would probably take a few years. But I really hope that is what happens. And I'm definitely pulling for it. EA needs a huge kick in the ass because the just infrastructure there is really struggling to move quickly. We've got a turnover of console this year, which is going to set things back again because they're going to be making games for Xbox One, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and then also the same game on the new console. But it's a little different. You're going to have tech issues on both consoles, so that's going to set them back as far as adding new features in. EA needs a huge kick in the ass, and they need to, if they have another company that's focusing on actually improving the game and has better gameplay and has a more in-depth franchise mode, and if that 2K game were to get NFL licensing, it'd be over for EA, or at least it would cause dramatic changes in their entire plan because all of a sudden they go from, we're going to sell the game no matter what, we can maximize our profits through Ultimate Team, to, oh, we're not all of a sudden going to automatically sell the game. We need things in this game that can actually, convince people to buy our game instead of 2K's game. So it would be huge, but I do think we're years and years away from that. Honestly, I don't know if 2K would do this unless the XFL has one successful season and people are actually into it. The XFL has to work first. Then I think 2K gets into it. 2K would probably take, I can't imagine them just picking up and having a good football game right away. That's a pretty quick turnaround. I imagine we're probably 3 years removed from 2K actually having an XFL game if it all works out, if the XFL is still alive in 3 years. 2K might want 2 years of the XFL sustaining before they pay for licensing and pay to invest in an entire new studio. They haven't made a football game in 15 years. So it's not going to happen overnight. There is hope. The XFL needs to succeed for that to work, or the NFL needs to just fork over a license to 2K, which would be great. I think there's actually almost as equal of a chance of that happening as the XFL surviving long enough for 2K to make an XFL game that actually works. A lot of factors going on, but there is potential there. There is hope, maybe. Joe is not cool. Here is the question. Favorite uniform in the NFL, just because I've never heard your answer. I like a lot of the uniforms for different reasons. I've always liked the new Seahawks jerseys because to me they're like the coolest modern jerseys. I think the Vikings too. The Vikings helmets are the coolest in the NFL. And then I like some of the classics too. Like, I really like the Bears jerseys. I really like the Steelers jerseys. And then I like the new Jets jerseys as well. Those would probably be my top 5, just off the top of my head. The Cardinals are pretty sweet. Niners are pretty sweet. That's probably a bunch of my faves right there. I like the Colts and the Chiefs. Like, I like just the clean, white and red or white and blue. Like, I think those look pretty clean. There's some of my favorite jerseys. This year's Chiefs versus 2013 Broncos. Who's better? I think 2013 is the Seahawks Super Bowl year. So, yeah, the year the Broncos won the Super Bowl? I'm trying to think back because they beat the Panthers in 2015, and then the Seahawks whooped on them. So, you want to know if this team is better than the team that lost to the Seahawks in the Super Bowl? Very different. Like, that Broncos offense was really good. They had great playmakers just like the Chiefs. But the explosion of the Chiefs is just so much different. But the difference is the Broncos had a better defense. It'd be a good matchup. It'd be a really good matchup. That 2013 Broncos team probably wasn't too unlike the Niners this year. Just, Peyton and Jimmy. Peyton's better than Jimmy, but the offense kind of, I hate to say the word gimmicky, but operated through its playmakers a little more than the Chiefs. Just kind of, Patrick Mahomes just kind of kicks ass and takes names. If you want an answer, I would take the Broncos. I don't know. It's just so not fresh, that 2013 Broncos team. I can't remember how good that defense was. If that defense was anywhere close to the 2015 defense, I would think the Broncos would be better because it was a really good offense, and the Chiefs' defense just isn't that good. I think the Broncos would score on this Chiefs defense, and if you had Von Miller to slow down the Chiefs a little bit, then probably the Broncos would be my answer. But don't quote me on that. This one's from Devontae Rivera. I know the Patriots haven't been the best drafters recently, but how much do you think consistently taking players picked 25 to 32 for the last 20 years has affected their roster building? Immensely. To answer this quickly and easily, there's about 16 to 20 players in every draft class that are legitimate first-round talents. So if you're picking 25 to 32, your odds of getting one of those guys are very low. And then you look at the second round, the next tier of players are in that 20 to 50 range. So like a top 20 pick is significantly more valuable than a top 28 pick, and a top 50 pick is significantly more valuable than a top 64 pick, if that makes sense. So you're hitting the start of a new tier basically with both of your picks. So it does make things significantly harder. And then Bill Belichick's philosophy is just different. Like, he's going to take guys that he likes, fit his system, not necessarily the guys that are the best athletes or the highest rated prospects or anything like that. He is drafting for his team. So they really aren't the best drafters. They make up for it in other ways, though, in how they win between the margins with their team building. This one's from Josh Kruger. What's the next step for the Patriots following last week's loss to the Titans? So, again, this was kind of a while ago, 2 weeks ago. Obviously their first step is going to be figuring out the Tom Brady situation. Do you bring him back? Do you try to hardball him? Does Tom Brady want more money? They got a lot to figure out. I feel like he's just going to be back, but there's this kind of hanging feeling that he just might be gone. So we'll see. Other than the Tom Brady situation, it's business as usual for them. Rinse, repeat, fill out their roster in creative ways and, be creative with the cap. I don't think too much is going to change logistically for them. And then two more. These ones actually came in from Discord from my patrons. Who's my favorite non-FBS prospect as of right now? I think it might be Gandy Golden, the receiver we talked about out of Liberty. I'm not fully sold on him yet. I do like what I saw, though. He looks really athletic and just a physical specimen. So I'm definitely intrigued by him in kind of a Kenny Golladay type of way. I really liked Kenny Golladay. I'm not all the way in on Gandy Golden yet. He had a couple drops I saw. I'm not sure he's on the same level as a route runner. But I do like Gandy Golden as a early day 3 guy. I don't think he'd be a third-round pick in this draft. But he's probably the top non-FBS guy. And then this one's from Greg. Rank all the different sports seasons. NFL regular season, NFL postseason, NBA regular season, MLB postseason. And he says EG, so he wants all of them. Getting a little greedy there, Greg. I'm just kidding. Love you, bro. Don't leave me on Patreon, please. The NFL takes the cake in the top 2. I would then put the MLB postseason 3rd, NHL postseason. No, I'll put NBA postseason 4th, NHL postseason 5th. I think the NHL postseason is the most overrated crap. For one, they let the entire league in, and it's by the nature of the sport, anyone could win it, so you have no idea who's going to come out. Some people like that. Favorites are good for sports because then you have underdog stories. In the NHL, it's like, all right, here we let half the league in. It's just going to be this crapshoot. We'll see who wins. Like that might be for some people. That doesn't do it for me, especially in a sport that's the 4th most watched for me. I need to know, okay, this team's favored. If this team wins, it'd be an upset. Like, I need a storyline. It's just a big mess in the NHL. I think and it goes on for like 8 years. I can't even watch a hockey game anymore. I just get so bored. I'd rather watch someone play like Apex Legends or Fortnite than the NHL. It's really, I think it's that boring. But yeah, you would obviously put playoffs above the other regular seasons. Then I would go, those are the top 5. NHL regular season is dead last. I would put NBA regular season second to last because it just doesn't matter. We know for the most part who's going to be playing in the final 2 series of the season in the NBA. And just sometimes feels a little long. And then I put MLB regular season at the top of the other sports just because, maybe I'm biased because Target Field is beautiful in Minneapolis, but I love in the MLB how there's games on all the time. And like, it's just great. Like when I'm working at 1:00 on a Wednesday, I can throw a Twins game on, or I can, throw a Red Sox game on, whatever. Like I just enjoy the fact that it's constantly going on. When your team loses, you get an opportunity to bounce back the next day. And I love going to games too. I love sunny day games. Go to a game outside on a Saturday. You don't get that in the NBA and the NHL. I think baseball is the best social sport. So that's my ranking for those. Again, NFL regular season, NFL playoffs. Then I'd go MLB playoffs, NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. Then I'm going to put the MLB regular season above the NHL playoffs. Then I would go NHL playoffs, NBA regular season, NHL regular season. There you go. That's the podcast. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I got to go play Beer Olympics with my Madden League that I'm staying out in this house in the middle of the woods in Alabama. So hopefully I make it out of there alive. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I hope you spread the word. I hope you leave a review. I hope you use promo code FranchiseGuy. And most importantly, I hope you have a great weekend. And we'll have some Super Bowl talk next week and maybe some more draft talk, a bigger mailbag next week on the podcast when I get home. So cheers as always, and we'll see you later. Peace.